Okay, so I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. It is kind of a beast. It's at 66 pages. It's kind of long. I spent entirely way too much time on this, but I do want to give a shout out to Malkavia and Ektos. They were the ones who helped do most of the data finding with us over the course of the past 3 playtests. I do want to make a caveat that most of this is probably going to be the same, but a lot of it probably could change from next playtest as well. And so we'll see how it goes from place to place. Here's my table of contents. We'll be going over the preface, we'll be going over fop doodles, then we'll be going over all the different classes, and then the second half of the book is basically all of my data kind of dumped out and explained in as best as I possibly can. That being said, I do want to say, and I do have a caveat here, I am not a developer for Iron Mace. I am not affiliated with them. I do not speak for them. I do not represent them. This passion is just a passion project for somebody who just does a lot of QA testing as a side hobby for a lot of other publishers and companies. So that's basically, I just want to make sure that no one gets confused with that. All information and testing was done in-game personally by me and my team. So none of this we don't go into game files. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I like to test everything firsthand. So there might be some inconsistencies or some incorrectness, but that's okay. That's what the fun part of testing things are. I go over the different classes. I gave the summary of each of the different classes, talk a little bit about it. I also mention a little bit about perk slots and leveling, what you get from leveling, max level, all that kind of stuff. The too long didn't read is basically you get an extra perk slot at level 5, 10, and 15. Other than that, leveling up doesn't do anything. And then I kind of go into a bit more detail. So these are like the starting stats for every character. Every character is going to have the exact same layout as the next 3 pages. This basically naked, that just means no armor equipped. So the only thing that's going to change is physical damage reduction. But this shows all starting stats for what you have just start off and off the bat, as well as a list of all weapons, armor, and miscellaneous that they can use. Anything in blue means that it's specifically unique to that class. The only exception is Fighter with one of his perks that allows him to wear all weapons, but I'm not going to bother with that. So this is basically just unique for each class. I also have a list of all the perks. They're literally screenshotted from the game, including spelling mistakes and all that kind of good stuff, but I listed them here as well, just in case you need a reference for them. Same thing with skills. And then, of course, I'll go over into a little bit more detail in the appendix that kind of goes into interesting interactions that people might not know about. Here's the cleric, same thing, their default gear, the cleric stats, all that kind of stuff. I will make this note here. It's interesting, the cleric is the only class in the game that has a 74 total stat points. Every other class has 75. I'm not sure if that's a typo or a rounding error or something, but just interesting little tidbit to know. So once again, cleric's abilities, got some cleric skills going there. Fighter, of course, can pretty much wear everything by default. And then, of course, one of his perks does allow him to wear every weapon in the game, including bows and wizard staff. Fighter perks, fighter skills. Then we've got to the ranger. Again, same setup, ranger perks, ranger skills. Then we got the rogue perks, rogue skills. Rogue, interestingly enough, has the most amount of skills of 10 out of every single class, and wizard has the least amount of skills of 3. Now, stats have 2 big things going for them. There's what I call a stat threshold and a neutral number. I'll get to those in a second, but I do want to point out a couple of things. That currently stats affect 10 out of the 21 attributes. So strength, for instance, affects health, and it affects physical power. Physical power technically changes physical power bonus, not strength, but I put them together anyway because usually you'll increase both of those at the same time anyway. Just like agility affects move speed, action speed, equip speed, interaction speed regular. Willpower affects magic resist rating, magic power bonus, magic power, and also blessing and curse duration. It is not listed on the character sheet in any way, but it does actually work. These 3, weight limit, spell memory, utility effectiveness, are stats that do not exist or currently work in the game, but they probably will down the line. Okay, so stat thresholds and neutral numbers. So every stat and attribute has what I call a neutral number. Anything above this neutral number is a positive modifier, anything below it is negative. So as we can see from a fighter who's 15 in all stats, every single thing is 0 except for armor, which again isn't related to your stats, that's just gear. And then spell casting speed, that's the only stat that doesn't have a true 0 as a functional neutral number, and magic resist rating. Everything else has a neutral number of 15. So for instance, at 15, you have 100 health, but you have a 0 physical power bonus. Anything more than that, and it's positive. Anything less than that, and it's a negative. This is across the board. All classes benefit from an attribute or stats the exact same way. On top of that, for instance, they have what's called thresholds. So what that means is that some values are weighted more than others. I always get the question, how much does one agility give? And it's really hard to answer. The simple answer is it depends. And I know that that's not a fair answer. And so I'll kind of go over detail over here. So for instance, from 15 to agility, from 15 to 25 agility, you'll notice that you only get 1% attacks or action speed, which is attack speed. But 25 to 35, you start getting 2%. Then at 40, you get back down to 1% again, and so on and so forth. When you get to 50, it'll actually be 0.5%. You'll see that on the next pages. So there are thresholds where value or certain stats and attributes are valued higher or lower than others. And I have all those listed out as well. So for instance, agility, any notes about stats that aren't working correctly or working weird, I have out here. I'm just not going to go ahead and read them. But for example, neutral number is 15. All stats have neutral number 15 except for will, which I'll get to because will is the most complex stat. This will tell you all the variations. So between 11 and 15, each point of agility gives 3 action speed and 6.5% equip speed. 15 to 25, it gives this, and so on and so forth. Agility also gives 1 move speed, and it does not seem like there's a threshold on that. So if you have 40 agility, 40 minus 15, because 15 is the net neutral number. Then you have plus 25 move speed. There does not seem any kind of a threshold for that. And then interaction speed is not listed because agility and resourcefulness both change that attribute. And it was almost impossible having a environment where I could test that kind of stuff in a realistic way. But I will let you know, though, interaction speed regular is roughly twice as effective from resourcefulness than it was from agility. So all the different stats, again, feel free to take through. I'm just kind of skip through. I don't want to read over everything. I go over all the same thing with neutral numbers and thresholds for knowledge, including the stats that don't work with that but are supposed to. Because, for instance, we don't have spell count. I think that's supposed to be spell memory is listed in the character sheet, and then spell capacity as the modifier, and then item identification speed, which isn't in the game yet either. All the way through, again, resourcefulness, we don't have much info because it only affected one stat, which is interaction speed regular, and we just didn't have enough data that I felt comfortable about putting it out. Then we also have strength. Strength is easy. It's the most relatively straightforward one. Once you get past 15 strength, everything is 2 strength and 1% physical power bonus. Will is the only way to get resist rating currently. In previous play tests, Dark Plate armor and Templar armor had resist rating baked into it, but they did not have it in this version of the play test. So Will was pretty much the only source outside of the Barbarian perk that allowed you to get magic resist. And then it also has thresholds, but it's very similar to armor rating, which we'll get to, and that there's a lot of different thresholds, so it's very hard to calculate with a straight number how much percentage you're actually going to get for an increase. So this is basically the so long didn't read. I basically consider agility to be arguably the strongest stat. It affects move speed, action speed, which is how fast you swap weapons, how fast you attack, all that kind of drink a potion, all that kind of stuff, as well as interaction speed, which is how fast you open or close doors, chests, and so forth. From a damage point of view, Will's magic power bonus is the best bang for point. You basically get double from strength or anywhere else. And if you're a rat, stacking resourcefulness and agility is the way to go. And I go into that a little bit more detail, but not too much. So this is the physical damage reduction in regards to armor. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, how much do you get per point of armor? It is not an easy formula. Basically, if you have 0 armor, meaning you have absolutely nothing equipped, you actually take 10% more physical damage from all sources. So that's very bad. Always have at least 10 armor, even just throwing on a big pair of shoes or something, but you never want to go below 10. After that, it basically stabilizes at getting 0.5% for the first 15 or so numbers, and then it kind of slowly dips on you getting less value per point of armor for how much move speed you lose and physical damage reduction. And then around 146 to 149, it evens out, and then it starts going back up again. I only have data up to 228 armor rating, but I would like to see around 300 to see if this actually stays flat or if it actually curves up a bit more and you get a lot more bang for your buck for armor and physical reduction down the road. So as you can see, here's all of the data, so you can compile it with what you want. This tells you the neutral number for armor is 10. Having 10 armor, you have a neutral modifier, and then this tells you how much percent you get per point of armor, and then the difference from the most previous one all the way up to 228. And then I go into the database for all the different sets of gear. This one we have boots. The big takeaway from boots is Lightfoot boots are by far the best in slot no matter what. They're the quietest, they give you the most amount of speed, and have really good armor. There's no reason to really wear anything else. Legs, I kind of explain a little bit more about what my recommendations are for what legs. Then we have the same thing for chest pieces, for hands and gloves. The long story for gloves is you should always wear them, with the only exception possibly being heavy gauntlet, because it does reduce your speed, but the armor value you get from it is actually usually worth it outside of grays and whites. But always wear gloves. They don't give you any penalties, and they just give you nothing but stats. And then head, ironically enough, head pieces are the worst move speed penalty for armor that you can get in the game. But ironically enough, the leather cap, which everybody can wear, is actually the best movement speed to armor ratio in the game. And then I have some takeaways from armor. I'm not going to go through them. Again, there'll be plenty for people to catch up and read with. And then I go through weapons. So the first page is with ranged weapons, daggers, and miscellaneous. I do have bare hands listed here, as well as a damage type. So a couple of interesting things is that bare hands do in fact do more base damage than certain weapons, and you can kind of see that throughout here. The torch also has a base damage of 13. You cannot throw it at people to do damage, but you can smack them with it. Next up we have the two-handers. Again, anything with start gear, that's highlighted in red. So I'll explain this later, but there's technically 6 tiers of gear: gray, white, blue, purple, orange, and gold. Starting gear is actually below gray. Like most of the time, if you find a gray version of that same weapon, it's always going to be better than what you're wearing. So I didn't realize that until about halfway through the most recent playtest, but swapping out your starter gear even for grays is actually an upgrade. And then over here we have the 100 melee. I do want to make special note that the crystal sword is the only weapon in the game that does magical damage. It does both physical and magical, but the fact that it does magical damage is pretty good. The interesting thing about willpower and how it scales is that most characters don't have magical resist, and the way you can stack magical damage in the game means that the crystal sword can do a lot more damage than almost any other weapon in the game, especially if you start stacking willpower up to about 50 or so, and then it starts getting diminishing returns. But a little bit of summary for the different things, some standouts. Interestingly enough, I also talk about how combos work. Combos are a little bit different, especially when it comes to dual wielding. I want to make a mention that the felling axe is unique in that if you actually hit a target, and a target is basically any player or enemy or whatnot, you actually increase your attack speed throughout the combo. It's the only weapon that seems to have that property and feature. Crystal Sword is the only one with base magic damage, and then crossbows currently do not need to be reloaded from your backpack into your hands. I did not do enough testing of this to know if you shoot and then put it in your inventory, if you have to equip it and then reload, but I do know if you have them all reloaded, put them into your backpack, you can shoot 5 or 6 times in a row. All you have to do is swap out the weapons, which is pretty sick and disgusting if you have some pretty good crossbows in your inventory. Damage from your weapon does get reduced if you connect with the shaft or the hilt, and not the main blade or the hammer. This mostly happens if you're too close to your target, if you're actually in your target, or if you're connecting with shields or other parry attacks. And then I go into a little bit more detail about dual wield, parrying, and shield stability. The long story short is the longsword is the only weapon that actually has a functioning parry in the game. Shield stability and parrying are both very much in their infancy, and they still need a lot more work. So this is probably what a lot of people want, is the damage calculator. To the best of my knowledge, I think that this is about as accurate as we can without like getting it directly from the source. The biggest problem was we did not able to play around with a test dummy, so I'd maybe get 1 or 2 attacks like every 5 games or so. So it never really was super amazing, great data gathering, unfortunately. But it seems to be that you take your base weapon damage, add any plus weapon damage modifiers, plus any additional physical or magic damage modifiers, and then you multiply that by either physical or magic power bonus, and that's your first set of damage. After that, then you multiply it by your skills and abilities, and then after that, you multiply it by your hit location. So if you hit somebody in the torso, it's just 100% damage. If it's limbs, it's 50%. If it's head, it's 150%. Then you subtract your target's physical damage reduction or magic resist if it's a magic weapon, and that equals your total damage 1d, and then you add whatever true damage you might have, and that just is blank whatever it is. So in an example, I have a spreadsheet over here to kind of go through it. We have a rogue with a 30 physical base damage rapier. They have plus 15 additional physical damage, 8 true physical damage, and 25 strength, which is a 10% power bonus. If they use all 3 ambush, backstab, and wake point, so ambush gives 50%, backstab is 30, weak point attack is 50%, and a single attack and aims for the back of the head, which is 150%. And we'll assume that the target's defense is 100 armor rating or 18.9% damage reduction. The first thing we do is we add up all the base weapon damage. We get to a total of 45. We multiply that by the physical power of 10%. We then multiply the skills, so added this up is 130, so you added 130 to 100 is 230%. After that, you multiply it by the back of the head, you multiply it by 150%, and then you subtract 18.9%, and you get a total of 138.4986, and then you add 8 true damage, and that bypasses everything for a grand total of 146 damage and 0.49. I'm 99% sure it rounds at the very, very end, not during any of the other calculations, and I believe it rounds down, so this attack would have done 146 damage into the back of the head. I go a little bit over move speed. The long story short is that 300 move speed is 100% movement speed. I know it's a little confusing, but basically just divide whatever your move speed is by 3, and that's what your percentage of move speed is. It does not seem like there were any thresholds. We went up and down about 50 numbers in either direction, and it basically seems to support that. So basically 1 point of agility is worth 1 move speed. So 3 agility is worth 1% more movement speed. So stacking agility for movement speed is not super ideal, but it does help a little bit. Mostly it's your gear and what you have equipped. I put some of the maps that were made on the wiki. There's some cute little flavor text I put in with that. This does not have the variation with the towers on B2, and I don't have any of the maps on B3 currently. And this is my appendix. So this is basically like any keyword I've listed in blue. So you'll notice I've put, different keywords and things like that. Everything will be listed back here with a little bit more depth. So I go over, what an attribute is, what B1 is, B2, B3. If you're looking for just more information on a specific subject or category, this is the best place to look. I go over class, perks, and skills. If there's anything notable, I don't go over each one because most are self-explanatory. But for instance, I go over things that most people might not know. For instance, like the axe specialization adds +10 to each hit. So obviously that benefits faster one-hand weapons more than two-hand weapons, and it also seems to work with Francesca axes, which are the ones that you throw. And so I kind of go over all the different things about where someone might have questions for and how they interact, and this goes on for about 10 pages. I do like this little tidbit, I'll go ahead and give you for free, that the doors, so the bars in this square hole are not real. They don't block hits, they don't block arrows. For all intents and purposes, it's a giant square murder hole, so you don't actually need to worry about hitting anything through there. And then at the very end, I put the class comparison stats for comparison, so you can see side by side who's got what and all that kind of good stuff, and that's pretty much it. The best thing I'll do is just anytime there's a new playtest, I'll update it and then just release the next version. So right now this is version 0.3 because there's been 3 playtests I've been involved with, and this is version A, so it's 0.3A. If I make any edits, it'll be 0.3B. Yeah, so if you turn to the next page of 51, it talks exactly about chambering right here. Right now, probably the most obvious one is using a Rondel dagger in your primary hand and a Castellan dagger in your secondary, because the third attack in the Castellan dagger series does 50% more damage than the other 2 attacks. So you would like to chamber that. So you would you hit right click, and that basically does 2 combos, and then you just hold down left click, which is just steady stabs up with the Rondel dagger until you're ready to do the headshot, and then you right click, and then it does combo number 3 from the Castellan, and you get that big damage multiplier. Nope, there are no ranges in this game. Everything is 100% precise. The only thing that changes damage if you keep hitting the same target is whether or not your weapon has a combo multiplier or a buff or a debuff is applied. But other than that, everything's consistent. Yeah, working on the testing. So Malkavia, I credit him in the end section over here. Malkavia was there for about 90+% of the entire time. Ektos was probably there for about 35-40%. And then we just kind of floated out a third person to whoever we could find available. That's why I only did up to 228. Every single one of those was physically in my inventory. I had a +1, +2, +3, +6, +8, and +10 armor necklace, and I literally just changed my armor around to get every single value with nothing else modified, and those were the exact recorded totals from the character sheet. And I don't know how they round. That's why if you look at the armor thing, there's this weird kind of dip that doesn't make any sense to me, right around in the mid-20s and 30s. I don't know why that's there. It's just, it is what it is, so I don't know if it's a UI issue, a database pulling issue, or if that's what it is. So bosses, I don't have any enemy data because trying to get specific data for enemy damage, hits, and all that kind of stuff is a monstrous task on a private server, let alone when you're having PvP and you're trying to test everything else. So enemy stats are probably going to be one of the last things I ever try and do, especially because of how massively they change from playtest to playtest. And because this isn't really a strategy or a mechanics guide, I don't really have any information for it. I might make a segue because I can at least explain the mechanics on how they're supposed to work. But again, whether or not they change it, because they changed one of the mechanics in the most recent playtest, so I kind of decided to just keep that information out for now. So I don't really have any sources. I don't go through game files. I don't have any inside sources or anything like that. Everything was done live testing within the game itself. All of the data was recorded either with screenshots provided by myself or Malkavia or Ectos. He provided a few as well, or it was me personally taking screenshots. It was basically the three of us are the only data that were used to make this document. But whether I took those screenshots while in my stash area outside of Old Tavern or inside, it was pretty much all live. Whenever we wanted to confirm numbers, we would poke each other once or twice to see if it deviated at all from the test dummy. The reason why the test dummy was consistent, because then we didn't have to worry about, oh, are you wearing slightly different armor, all that kind of good stuff, plus rounding things and everything like that. Little side note is that the test dummy actually has 0 armor, which means it actually takes 10% more damage from all hits than everything else. So if you ever lined up why the test dummy seems to take different damage than when you hit your teammate or something like that, that's why. But no, everything was verified with a degree that we feel confident in making it. In order to reverse engineer the data, basically you have to have like a hypothesis and kind of a general idea where to start. So we test out a whole bunch of stuff, we get data and numbers, and then we try and make a trend line, or we try and guess what would happen. Oh, let's change these variables. If our calculations are correct, it should equal this, and then we test that to make sure it works. So we did that pretty much to verify almost all of the stuff, unless I specifically say otherwise. One of the things, for instance, was with shrines. So shrines right now, the healing shrine in particular heals 100 health. Now, in theory, it should benefit from magical healing because it's a magical shrine. It should be using that stat. However, that was one of those things that we did not have enough data for me to feel confident in saying yes or no that it does work or anything like that. So anytime something, see like right here, we did have enough time to test, but it does seem like magical is healing, but I don't want to verify it because, again, I don't feel confident in the number of attempts we use with that. So everything that's listed is either verbatim screenshot for the numbers that we pulled, or if they are guesstimations or anything like that, they are listed as such. Action speed is basically anything you're physically holding. It's attack speed, weapon swap speed, how fast you bandage, how fast you surgical kit, how fast you do anything like that. Whereas interaction speed regular is anything you interact with the dungeon. Corpses, doors, torches, all that kind of stuff. Whether you're opening or closing a chest, whether you're opening or closing a door, all of that is interaction speed regular. Right now, I feel that there's a bug because I think that the portal shrines are supposed to use magical interaction speed, and they do not. They use regular right now. But I have a feeling that's probably a bug. So the primary focus of next test, assuming nothing drastically changes that I need to go back and revisit, is I want to spend a lot more time on caster spells, mostly because casters are getting kind of revamped, is what it sounds like, is the rumor mill going for the next one. So I really want to visit them because out of all the areas, that's where I feel the least confident in a lot of our numbers. So for instance, the blessing and curse duration stat, it's not on the character sheet, but I do know that will is definitely affecting it because invisibility lasts a lot longer than the default force Sancus that it says it is. So I'm pretty sure it's working there. So let's say somebody casts slow on me. Is that slow duration based 100% on the caster's willpower and their magic power and their percentage for increase, or whether or not my defense counts for anything towards that or not? I want to double check. I'm pretty sure that smite and is affected. Every single hit gets a bonus from your magic power, but I want to confirm that. Long story short, mostly casters and spells and interactions. Okay, take it easy, everyone.